was a good LP. It was very, very. Everything was about 20. Everything was about 1,000 miles an hour. It was good LP. That, objectively speaking, I think so. Everything on there was good. I don't think there was one track I really hated.
There are many more influential albums than this, and although Machine Head was a stronger album, I still think that the influence, the impact of inrock was, seismic.
It was very different to Led Zeppelin, very different to Black Sabbath, very different to what Cream had done. It really was progressive music, but very heavy progressive music.
And it's five guys just going down the same path together. You don't get that. You have people who try to do it, and there are people who work at improvisation, and you can't work at improvisation, you just have to follow.
And the band just come alive. It's just like a different band to anything that Purple have done before.
They were really something that was a hark back to the classical music days. Wagner would have been comfortable being in Deep Purple.
When Ian Pace is jamming away drumming, and John's playing in his Hammond organ, and Ritchie's following him, they're teasing each other, they're pushing each other to the limits all the time. And Ian Pace is always just sitting there holding the groove together.
You're listening to some tremendous performances, some of the greatest performances in the history of hard rock.
I mean, it's one of the defining records of that particular genre and that particular period of rock music.
The greatest rock and roll band of all time.
Rocking to the east and west, hard-hit a woman and a soft-hearted man. Cause the trouble since it all began. Took a little rice, took a little bands, rock and roll down in New Orleans. I'm a speed king, you gotta hear me sing. 'Cause I'm a speed king, see me. Ah, speed king, you gotta hear me sing. I'm a speed king, see me.
The first Deep Purple group, which is generally referred to as Mark I, they began life as a business proposition. A man called Tony Edwards, who worked in the clothing industry, just above Oxford Street where the wholesale clothes shops are, came into contact with a glamorous fashion model who wanted to be a singer. And through her, he met some people in the music industry. Among these people was a guy called Chris Curtis, who used to play the drums in the Searchers. And Chris Curtis had an idea for a band called Roundabout, and he knew who he wanted to recruit. And among the people he wanted to recruit was John Lord and Ritchie Blackmore. So here you've got the nucleus of Deep Purple and one of their three managers together already. And Chris Curtis dropped out along the way. Lord and Blackmore recruited Ian Pace and Rod Evans and Nick Simper.
Now, the only way to describe Deep Purple in their early phase was a mishmash. It was a melting pot. It was trying to find a style and a direction, but it had elements of pop of the time, elements of psychedelia, elements of blues, elements of classical, elements of progressive. But all three albums have pretty much one thing in common. They're a melting pot. It was directionless, but trying to find a direction, which makes those three albums among the most fascinating that Purple ever recorded.
Well, obviously, because Deep Purple had been put together very quickly, and with pressure on them to produce a record almost instantly, they didn't really have time to sit down and plan what they were going to do and write a lot of songs together. So they initially started by doing quite a lot of covers, and Hush was one of those. Done for the first album, obviously, and then before they knew it, they pulled it off as a single, and it got to number 4 in the American charts. And for a band that had only been together literally a few weeks, it was quite an astonishing start to their career, really.
she's on my mind. No doubt about it, she looks so fine. She's the best girl that I've ever had. Sometimes she's gonna make me feel so bad. Na, 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 na.
They didn't know where to position themselves in the great rock firmament of the time. And curiously, they became more successful in the USA than the UK.
Ironically, at that time, they weren't really, although signed to Parlophone in the UK, the same label as the Beatles, EMI seemed less enthusiastic about the band as their American counterparts did. So they weren't really promoting them and pushing them much in their own country. And for the first sort of year and a half of the band's existence, very few people were actually aware of them in the UK, but in the States it was a different kettle of fish altogether.
Hush, hush, I thought I heard her calling my name. Now hush, hush, she broke my heart, but love just the same. Now hush, hush, thought I heard her calling my name. Now hush, hush, I need her loving and I'm not to blame. Now
And they never really followed it up with an equally successful single. They had things like River Deep, Mountain High, Kentucky Woman, other covers. But in America, they started off with this huge, unexpected success and then had a problem of following it up. So that there was always a demand by the label of, we want you to do pop hits. We need pop songs on the record to put into the charts. Purple themselves never actually believed they were a pop band. It was a freak, if you want, and an unfortunate freak in some respects, because it coloured their career at that stage. Hence the reason that eventually they changed the lineup of the band, simply to allow themselves to focus on what they really wanted to be, which was really a prototypical British heavy rock.
A young band needs a strong producer a lot of the time. Now, obviously Led Zeppelin had Jimmy Page having a very strong idea of what he wanted, but Derek Lawrence maybe should have taken a firmer hand, or maybe he was just, thinking that maybe his commercial ear wasn't really good enough, because after getting a hit off the first album, the next two albums were pretty disastrous, really. And in the modern era, if you had a hit album followed by two turkeys, then you're in real trouble. So I think Purple understood that as much as anyone. They knew that, they had to change.
I believe that the Mark I lineup did some very good tracks, some covers, some originals, which really indicate where they were going to go. Mark I were not only developing, but actually laying down a very strong foundation from which Mark II could take off. And I'd say that without Mark I, Mark II would never have found their feet so readily and so easily.
Purple were one of the few bands that weren't content just to play variations on blues. So they had a little bit more texture in what they were doing. But the only problem was that Rod Evans was never really quite good enough to front the band. Rod was more of a master of the ballad, which Ritchie Blackmore always said as well. So if they were going to really make an indent as a serious rock band, that was the first problem they had to address, really.
Particularly Ritchie Blackmore had this sort of vision, an idea of the direction he wanted the band to go in. They had a kind of reputation with the original lineup that it was a bit sort of poppy. I don't think that's really fair, but the fact that they had recorded some covers of Beatles songs, etc., and did give that impression that they weren't perhaps as serious a rock band as some bands like Cream of the time and so forth. And I think he wanted to push the band into a harder, more aggressive direction.
I remember Ritchie Blackmore telling me when he'd gone to see Led Zeppelin that he had to find someone who could scream like Robert Plant. And so they came across Ian Gillan. And Ian Gillan and Roger Glover were obviously together in episode 6, and a great writing team. Both of them write really well. And with the introduction of them into the band, I think that was raised it to a new level for them. It was a new, exciting sound.
and Gillan suggested, why don't we bring my mate Roger in, as well? And I think Roger Glover came down to a rehearsal where Nick Simper wasn't present and jammed with them. And they realised that this guy's pretty good, so we'll have a wholesale change here. We'll get a new bass player and a new singer at the same time.
Roger, we found him in a gutter. No, Roger, poor old Roger. He turned up to the session to do one number we did. He was their bass player. We weren't originally going to take him until Pacey said, he's a good bass player, let's keep him. So I said, okay.
Now, as far as the great world outside was concerned, this changeover happened very smoothly. But behind the scenes, it wasn't like that at all. I believe Nick Simper was very pissed off. And they had to buy him off and, give him some money to go away quietly. Rod Evans was a bit different because I believe Rod Evans had met a wealthy heiress on an American tour and was planning to marry this heiress, and I believe he did so. And so he just sort of disappeared, really, as far as everyone was concerned.
I think it was Rod Evans who said that, one of his friends said to him one time, oh, I've heard you're out of Deep Purple. And he said, well, what the hell are you talking about? And it was only then it transpired. So what they were doing is they would be playing a gig with the Mark I lineup, and then after that, everybody go back to London and be rehearsing again with Gillan and Glover. So it was quite a way down the line before they found out that they were out.
Well, Nicky wasn't constructive. He didn't have any ideas, and he was an average bass player, so he had to go. Rod just wanted to go to America and live in America, and he's doing very well. He always does very well. Rod's a very nice guy. Well, so Nicky was, but he got very bitter.
I remember talking to John Lord a couple of years ago, and he says Nick Simper is still rather bitter about his treatment in Deep Purple, and can you blame him? Whether it was a management decision, whether it was a band decision, whether it was simply practical because they had a load of gigs lined up and it meant losing money to come off the road, whatever the situation was, Evans and Simper were treated rather badly by the other three and everyone else surrounding Deep Purple. And unfortunately, history has treated them rather badly, but in terms of musicality, you can understand exactly why they wanted to change lineup.
The key change with getting Gillan and Glover, I suppose initially, was that they produced a lot more ideas. When the band was jamming and working on song ideas for the album, there was a lot that came from those guys, particularly from Roger Glover. He'd been in a band where really they didn't write much. It was just a pop band. He's suddenly in a band where he's playing a riff, he's come up with an idea, and the rest of the band are feeding off it, and they're using those ideas. Deep Purple didn't really write, I suppose, great songs. And it certainly changed a bit when they changed the lineup.
When rock bands achieve greatness, it's because everything falls into place at the right time. Two new guys come in, bang, all falls into place, they're up and running.
When you get 5 guys that gel so well together, you put them in a room and it just works. You're lucky if you get it once in your life. Some people have been lucky to have it 2, maybe 3 times. But that chemistry that you get when you naturally know the instinctive way that someone's going to do something and you can follow it, and that's what made that Inrock album a superb album, because they were bringing in new writers, so there was new ideas, there's new stimulation.
Roger Glover and Ian Paice just sounded brilliant together from the get-go, and I mean, obviously you need. I think Roger Glover is really like the anchor of the band, because with someone as almost like jazzy and freeform as Ian Paice could be at times, quite sort of adventurous as a drummer, he was definitely a star in his own right. And I think Roger Glover is the kind of. You can't have too many. Well, you've got a lot of show-offs in that band, and you need somebody just to get on with, keeping the old rock-solid foundation there. And so I think, that's not to underestimate Roger Glover's ability. He's obviously a brilliant bass player, but he was very aware of keeping the ensemble glued together.
mean, they were the catalysts to bring out the best in Ritchie Blackmore and John Lord and Ian Paice. Not that they probably needed too much, but obviously there was something, the chemistry wasn't right with the two guys that preceded them. All of a sudden, Purple are writing songs that grab your attention. History has proved that they're some of the best songs that were ever written in rock music.
I think that Roger Glover was a real metronome too. Once he got to work well with Ian Paice, the pair of them were very, very solid. I always remember how Roger would wear a cowboy hat and he just sort of rocked side to side in time with the music. Ian Gillan had very, very long hair. I mean, everybody had long hair, but he had exceptionally long hair for the time. And during the instrumental passages, he would shake his head in such a way that the hair went round and round and round in circles, give a rather odd look. He would also play the bongos as well. Whether he did this as just something to do because he got a headache shaking his head around like that, or whether he was a proficient bongo player, I'm not very sure, because you couldn't hear him above all the din, to tell you the truth. What really made people sit up and take notice was the concert at the Albert Hall with the Philharmonic Orchestra.
What the hell is this all about? This is so pretentious. This is a nonsense. This is rock trying to get a credibility and a cachet, an artistic bent it doesn't deserve. But of course, they were ahead of their time.
John Lord relished the idea of putting it together. Because he had leanings in that direction anyway.
The rest of them went along with it with varying degrees of enthusiasm, I think. The most enthusiastic was John, and probably the next down was Ian Gillan, who was keen to be seen as a serious musician, and I think Pacey and Glover were sort of either way, whereas Ritchie Blackmore tolerated it.
It was ridiculous, and in many ways was regarded as something of a failure when it was first performed and released. But in another way, it was ahead of its time. Yes, it was crazy, it was very pretentious. It also provided a crucial moment. It allowed Purple to catch their breath, to put something out, to introduce Mark II, while they actually developed the songs which were to be on In Rock.
This might not have been all that successful commercially or even artistically, but it grabbed headlines. It was a big deal. It also had the effect of making Deep Purple appear to be serious musicians and not a trivial pop band. But I think Ritchie struck a deal with John Lord and the rest of them. He said, if I go along with this, and I turn up at the Albert Hall and play with all these guys with their violins and cellos, then you've got to make an all-out rock album next. We forget all this pop stuff. We're going to make a blues rock album next. And it's going to be hard and tough, and that's the direction we should go in.
I got fed up with playing with classical orchestras, and I thought, well, this is my turn. I'm the rock kind of thing, you know. So John was into more classical. I said, well, you've done that, I'll do the rock. Whatever turns out the best, we'll carry on with. And I said, if this fails, this record, then I'll play with orchestras the rest of my life.
There's no question that the group spent more time on In Rock, but the time they spent on it was not because of problems, I don't think. It was because they wanted to get it right. They were really enthusiastic, although it's no secret that as time went on, there were tensions within the group amongst the personalities. At the time, I think all five of them realized that they'd got a really good group of musicians together, and they could do well if they knuckled down.
From the very start to finish of making In Rock took roughly a year from the time that Gillan and Glover joined and they started demoing tracks till the album being released. And one of the reasons for that was that they were committed to making the Concerto for group and orchestra recording, doing some shows both in England and America. So it did rather take a lot of time out of their schedule. I know Ritchie Blackmore was getting really pissed off with John Lord for taking so much time over this little baby of his, the Concerto, that he missed quite a lot of Purple rehearsals when they were demoing tracks. And what they did was they actually started recording in a place in London, the Hanwell Community Centre, and this was some fairly isolated municipal building where they could make as much noise as they wanted, which if you're a band like Deep Purple and you're cutting tracks for In Rock, that's a pretty good situation. And one of the bands that was also rehearsing in this space near to them in an adjacent room, it could be argued that they may well have been listening with a little, I don't know, glass to the wall, you know, kind of listening in rather too intently, because it was a band who were called Spice at the time, but they were later known as Uriah Heep. And I think anyone who's ever listened to Uriah Heep records would maybe, go along with the opinion that they might have taken a few ideas from Deep Purple, let's put it that way.
They toured a lot. They worked very hard, which is the way you had to do it in those days. There were no videos in those days. You had to work your way up through the clubs to the small concert halls to the larger concert halls, and you had to stay on the road for 6-8 months a year, and that's what Deep Purple did essentially. And they were damn good by this time, and when you play as often as they did, you get good anyway. And so they'd built up a following, and In Rock just happened at the right moment for them. So bang, bang, suddenly it was Deep Purple mania.
A lot of rock bands can make a lot of noise. Few rock bands can make a lot of noise and put it into the kind of package that makes it appealing to a lot of people. And Deep Purple had a wonderful ear for melody. A lot of that really from the way Ritchie Blackmore hears music.
Other bands can spend years doing albums and it'll never sound like that. The sound is raw, the sound is aggressive, and the sound... When I first heard the opening salvo of Speed King, I just about had a heart attack. I mean, I was a wee boy, and it was like, my God, can you make this noise with guitars and, and a keyboard? So my little band, we had to go and try and find a keyboard player. We didn't realise that you have to be John Lord to get that particular sound, And my mate with his little Bontempi didn't quite get that Hammond B3 through the Marshall cranked full on. And it was just the whole album. I don't think there's a song that I don't enjoy on the whole album.
Speaking's a great way to start any album. And Deep Purple in Rock starts off with this almost jumble of sounds. It's almost as if it's the end of a track. And I'm not sure how they recorded it, whether or not it started out being an end part, and someone said, no, let's put it at the beginning, make something a little different. Because it's a jumble and jungle of sounds that sounds like the whole thing is collapsing in and itself, out of which bursts speaking.
Ritchie did say that if it wasn't dynamic and it wasn't exciting, it had no place on the album. And I think if you've written a song like Speaking, it's going to set the tone for what you're doing. It's a real mission statement. It's absolutely out of the traps, really fast. I mean, Ritchie really liked Fire by Jimi Hendrix and wanted a really punchy, up-tempo track. And they wanted it to be in the live set, to open their live set with to really blast home what the new Deep Purple was all about, to really knock an audience out with the first song, and so it's the obvious choice of an opening track.
To the east and west, hard-headed woman and a soft-hearted man. Cause the trouble since it all began. Take a little rice, take a little bands, rock and roll down in New Orleans. I'm a speed king, you gotta hear me sing. 'Cause I'm a speed king. See me fly.
In the lyrics from Gillan, it's all very playful, little references back to 50s rock and roll. So it's very much a sort of, you know, a song made to play live, and with a band who was going to play as much as Deep Purple were in the 70s, you know, it obviously has been played a million times, but I don't think it's ever sounded bad, because it's just one of those tracks that is a really electrifying track.
When you hear it, you know the chorus immediately, and it's got a real sense of rhythm and pace and balance that was very metal, and very metal of a later era, because it's not out of the question for you to take a thrash fan from 1983, 84, 85, a Metallica fan who'd never heard Deep Purple before, and say, listen to this, listen to Speaking from 1970, and have them say, oh, it sounds like thrash.
I'm a speed king, you gotta hear me sing. I'm a speed king.
It's the closest Purple got, certainly on that album, to metal. And I would say that with the exception inevitably of Smoke on the Water, it's the most important song that Mark II recorded in terms of what its influence would be later on.
Deep Purple were the ultimate virtuoso heavy rock band, and you know, right from inrock onwards, they were the the undisputed masters. I mean, Zeppelin would play long extended instrumental things live, but I don't think they had quite as much of a progressive rock nature to what they were doing. Purple were always jamming away on you know, even on studio takes.
The intention is there. It's, guys, we're doing something that's really exciting here, and we're just going to slay everybody. And that's exactly what happens when you put that album on. You know the intention is, this is a badass band, these guys are dangerous, you know, and the album can only be to this high standard. And how they manage, when you start with a song of such a high standard, to manage to keep that going throughout the album is quite an astonishing feat.
To get it onto tape, pain in the fucking arse. That's why I don't like recording too much. You don't? No. It's too clinical, again. A lot of people love it because they can edit their music, put it together and make it nice, but when they get on stage, they're lost. Well, my type of way of thinking is the opposite. I love to have that freedom, just going on stage and playing whatever I want to play at the time. I mean, I'll play the numbers, which I'm supposed to play, but the in-between parts, when I'm feeling good, I'll be away and play something completely off the wall I've never ever played in my life.
I think attitude was a key factor in rock. They knew they were out to create some big cataclysmic sounding record that was just going to blow the competition off the face of the earth. That was the intention, and it pretty much did it. I mean, you really only Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath could live with that level of competition, and these were almighty bands. So in that sense, the attitude was there from the start. I mean, what Roger Glover recalled was his abiding image of the recording of that album is looking at the VU meters on the mixing console and seeing them hard to the right, completely in the red, all the time. they were playing with a lot of attitude, and they were, you know, they were looking to fire off each other, to sort of to really, you know, because they were an improvisational band as well. They were obviously looking to, you know, create sparks off each other and really get it going. And I think they did a great job of getting that.
I started a long while ago in the R&B 60s in England, and that's where I sort of learnt my chops and everything. And a lot of those things that I learnt, they've all been useful along the way. But I've really felt in Purple, it was either totally one thing, which is soloing like a mad mother, or being a rhythm guitarist with keyboard shaped, and that was fine for Purple. It was a big part of the sound.
Deep Purple had gone through the phase of 3 albums in Mark I, which to some extent laid a foundation and looked for a focus. They'd done their first album with Mark II, Concerto for Group and Orchestra, which was very much a one-off. It wasn't any more than that. And now, out of the blue, in a way, came Inrock, one of the great rock albums of all time, a landmark record. And in one record, it encapsulated the greatness of Mark II. It was very heavy, laid on elements of 5 musicians, and I include Ian Gillan as a musician, even though he's a singer, pushing themselves right to the limit and actually pushing the envelope on what rock music could be. And it also had a lot of credence and credibility because it was very musical. It was also heavily laying on experimentation. I've always felt that Child in Time, for instance, that's an opera in itself, but a very dark opera. If you compare it to Queen and Bohemian Rhapsody, that's almost light-hearted. It's Gilbert and Sullivan compared to Ligeti.
It opens with Speed King, which is proto-thrash metal, 20 years before thrash metal ever got invented. And it's got Child in Time on it, which is this, if anything that Purple, that people know and love, could be remotely termed as prog rock, then maybe Child in Time was it. But it's just this epic rock track with Gillan singing out of his skin. This is, the new guy, really. And the band just come alive. It's just great heavy rock. It defined the genre pretty much.
The mood of it starts off very simply, and the lyrics tell of living in the nuclear age.
Could never quite figure out what the lyrics meant on that, although I think it might have been a vague plea for peace. Vague pleas for peace were very popular in those days, of course. It seemed to be about a soldier who had regretted shooting someone or something. It had a sort of war, army, anti-war feel about it. But I don't think the lyrics made much difference. It had a good melody, it had that good up and down riff, and it enabled John Lord and Ritchie Blackmore to show off in a big, big way.
Sweet child in time, you'll see the line that's drawn between the good and the bad. See the blind man, yeah, he's shooting at the world, bullets flying, taking toll.
Gillan really showcased why he was regarded as one of the greatest vocalists of all time on that particular track. Live, he did it for a number of years, and of course it's one of the finest moments of Purple's history, Purple's career.
One thing that Ian Gillan brought to the group, which Rod Evans certainly lacked, was the ability to scream. And he could sing quite gently for a while, and then suddenly he would erupt. And at the same time, the rest of the group would erupt with him. So you had a gentle passage, and then it suddenly exploded, it did.
And the passion in Ian Gillan's voice when he reaches the crescendo of the three screams that he does, and he takes it up, and he takes it up, and he takes it up. I've tried to do that song, and we had to compromise and just do the two screams. For him to be doing that every night is astonishing.
Live he did it for a while, but in doing so really strained and stretched his voice, because if you listen to Child in Time, it's got so many vocal gymnastics and the demands are so heavy on his voice. It's amazing he could actually deliver everything from a very soft, mournful, portentous intro right through to the end with the huge screams, which are somewhere between an orgasm and death throes, but somehow combine them and really knock you back in your seat. It's an amazing vocal performance, and one of the greatest vocal performances rock has ever known. And when I first heard the track, I remember thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. And you had to go back and listen to it again just to make sure you weren't actually missing the point here.
And then when Ritchie comes in with this blinding guitar solo that he's obviously composed in different sections, and it works so fluidly. You would think that he's just gone in and played it off the top of his head. It's so beautiful and it's so complex and intricate. Even from a singer's point of view, to listen to the music, to listen to the phrasing and listen to the timing, because his timing in it's absolutely impeccable. I think it's one of the greatest guitar solos, and I think it's one of the greatest songs.
He had some fairly overblown ideas, but he also had some really, he played with real economy at times, and yeah, you mix that and really beautiful playing and melodic nearly always, and then you, on the other side of that, he had the fiery, furious style of play, and also the volatile mood swings. So he was a complete, he's the ultimate guitar hero in many ways. He is there anyone who defines guitar hero more than Ritchie Blackmore? I don't think so.
It was around this time that Blackmore came to the fore as the most visually dominant member of the group. It's generally the singer's job to do that, But Ritchie was having none of that, especially as he'd been in the band 3 years and Gillan was a new recruit. So he would leap up and down and take his guitar off and swing it around. And towards the end of the show, they'd put strobe lights on him and switch all the rest of the lights off, so you could just see him jerking around, you know. And he took to breaking guitars as well at the end of the show. So he wanted the spotlight on him.
Sweet child in time, you'll see the line that's drawn between the good and
Child in Time is an emotionally heavy song, not just if Speaking is like a powerful rock and roll track. Child in Time is heavy in a different sense. I mean, it's like it is a hugely emotive track, and I think that Ian Gillan has said rather flippantly that he didn't really invest any meaning into those lyrics at all. It was a bit of a racket and he just sang whatever came into his head, which I think is somewhat disingenuous and I think a bit silly really, because it's such an important track to a lot of people. It is such an iconic rock classic that I think its meaning is important really to the people who listen to it, and that there's enough meaning in the music that he could be singing a load of old twaddle, but I don't think it's quite as loose as he has claimed anyway. Maybe he's just trying to sort of undercut any perceived pomposity that Purple might have had.
These days, he never even touches Child in Time live because he could not deliver the vocal performance, and who can blame him? But the fact that he did it once, in fact more than once live, actually is to his great credit, because I don't know many singers over the years who would even have attempted it. Would an opera singer have tried that? I don't know. It's absolutely remarkable.
Child in Time was good, purely from the vocal point of view. It was very, very different. Inrock was good, but it was a good period, but we were coming up, you know what I mean?
Inrock made a huge, I mean, it's a pivotal rock album. It made a huge impact. It's certainly not their strongest set of songs. I mean, Machine Head is a far more rounded album, has a lot more depth. You've really only got two, I would say, out-and-out classics on the original 7-track album of Inrock, and that would be Child in Time and Speaking. The other tracks are by no means bad, but they're not. They didn't live on in the memory. They're not. Speaking and Child in Time are not just Deep Purple classics, they are rock classics. And the second half of the album certainly isn't as strong as those first 3 songs. But having said that, I mean, you know, that first side is pretty awesome stuff.
There was no composition on the Purple things. There were basic ideas when you went into the studio. Maybe the magic with Purple in the old days was it was so spontaneous, because when we got it on tape, it was the first time we ever played it. You know, so maybe that was the magic then. But by the same token, we often came across things which we enjoyed playing, but if you took it out of context of an album, you'd say it was dull, so you wouldn't listen to it. In the context of a 35, 40-minute album, it was right.
I think the audiences went to see Deep Purple expecting a virtuoso display, and they got it. They expected a lot of noise, they expected dynamics, and they expected something pretty exciting. I can't overemphasize this business about the soloing, which now, you know, no one ever dreams of soloing like that. But Ritchie would throw in little bits of classical music. He might throw in a bit of Bach, and he might throw in a bit of Jingle Bells if it was Christmas, and he might throw in a trivial pop song in the middle of his solo. These solos would take place with the rest of the band and do nothing as well. You can't imagine that happening now, that a group would abandon the stage to one of their members to show off, essentially. But that's what happened with Deep Purple. But it was expected of them. This was the the key thing, that they would show off their instrumental virtuosity.
These guys were prodigiously talented. And when it was all gelling, I mean, they were very comfortable in each other's company on stage, and very comfortable, obviously, with the level of talent that all the people around them had, because they go off on these lengthy jams. You can only do that if you're incredibly comfortable in your own talent and everybody around you. And the fact that they would do it night after night after night just kind of gives you an indication of how talented they were. And they probably knew it. I mean, because that kind of jamming it's just showing off. It's musical showing off. But they knew they were good.
Kiss were a band that would smash up a guitar because it's what they felt they ought to be doing at the end of a big dramatic rock show. I don't think Ritchie Blackmore smashed a guitar up because he felt like it was the thing to do. I think it was probably just all he could do to control himself from just wrapping it around Ian Gillan's head most nights. I
think Ritchie felt that Ian Gillan didn't show him the correct amount of deference for his for his position in the group. Those two never really got on and never did. Ritchie was a difficult character. He could be awkward. I remember he always had his own separate dressing room. He said that the reason for this was so he could tune his guitars in silence and what have you. But I really think that he was a loner. He wasn't a very sociable man.
I mean, Ritchie, when he's playing on stage, tries to blast everyone off the stage. Right. I mean, it's a kind of competition. One of the things Ritchie said to me when I joined Deep Purple, he said, you've got to bear this in mind. He said, I don't mean it badly, he said, but I'm going to try and blow you off stage every night. And I said, all right, great. I said, well, in that case, I'm going to try and do the same to you. He said, yeah, great. He said, in that way, we'll have a good band.
You didn't really know with Ritchie whether he was going to, sort of smile or punch you in the face, and I think that volatile edge, it obviously was Purple's undoing in the end, certainly of that lineup, of the Mark II lineup. But it also is what made them so thrilling to be around. That you can hear the creative friction in the music. You would certainly have been able to see it up on stage, and I can imagine that there was some. You can imagine there was a few punch-ups, backstage after certain gigs. I mean, if you fuck up on stage and you're in Ritchie Blackmore's band, you're going to know about it.
Well, Inrock established Deep Purple as a Premier League rock band, and they maintained that position for 3 or 4 years until things started to go wrong for them.
Well, there's a holy trinity, really, of British rock bands who shaped the sound of rock in the 70s, and that's Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath. All had a very different sound. All were hugely influential, all made a fantastic run of records as well. I mean, from inrock onwards, Deep Purple were really, trading blow for blow with Sabbath and Zeppelin.
I believe that inrock established Deep Purple's style, and by that I mean the ability to be heavy on the improvisation, or seemingly heavy on improvisation, even though it's very disciplined, and actually have a heavy, classically oriented sound that had a blues bass and was very British. There were influences from the Beatles in there, definitely, in the way that they sort of experimented with sounds. You could hear it on Child in Time, for instance. And I think that's what they established, was that dynamic, heavy British groove.
On stage you have a lot of intense excitement. It's like adrenaline, kind of nervous presence. Right. People either love it or they get scared of it. It's a bit too. Right. That's why we have a lot of people that maybe hate us, because we're so demanding. You don't like the music, you've got to turn it off. What we put down, you just can't talk over our music. Right. And we don't want anybody talking over it. So they either say nothing or they leave. And that's why we get, for instance, no radio play in England, because the housewives can't do their dusting when we're playing on the radio. It probably interferes with the hookah or something.
In terms of metal, in terms of the younger bands who were to come out during the mid to late 70s into the early 80s, Deep Purple were a fundamentally important influence. Mark II was definitely the lineup that every budding young metal musician, from Lars Ulrich to Steve Harris, etc., Metallica, Maiden, you name it, inrock's the album people tend to turn to. And it's not just because of great songs like Child in Time, it's because of a groove.
The Deep Purple legend was created within rock. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Had they even imploded immediately, they still would have had an enormous impact on the development of 70s rock.
Purple always had a very different sound to Black Sabbath and to Led Zeppelin. All three bands sounding very, very different. And I mean, it's one of the defining records of that particular genre and that particular period of rock music.
It's got so many intricacies going in there, and the musical interplay between Jon Lord and Ritchie Blackmore especially reached a new level. This was progressive music, only it was heavy progressive music.
In rock is a archetypal, in the true sense of the word, heavy metal record. And you know, if you're going to call an album Deep Purple in rock, you are really, you know, you're really stamping your authority there and saying that we are the kings of what's going on right now. And I think it was a very bold title, and they delivered on their promise.
3 times I tried to be